When we look back at Native American history, most people think of warriors, buffalo hunts, or encounters with European settlers. But beneath the surface of daily survival existed something deeper, stranger, and far more unsettling: the rituals. These weren't casual ceremonies. They were grueling trials of body and spirit, sometimes so extreme that modern audiences can barely imagine them. Tonight, we open the door to a world where pain was sacred, visions were currency, and suffering wasn't just endured, it was embraced. But here is the question I want you to hold in your mind as we move forward. What does it mean for a culture to deliberately seek pain? Was it madness? Or was it a path to transcendence? In many tribes across the Great Plains, young men were not truly considered adults until they had faced the ordeal of a vision quest. Unlike modern coming-of-age rituals, like blowing out candles on your 18th birthday, this was no celebration. A vision quest began with isolation. A boy on the edge of manhood was led to a remote site, usually a mountaintop or barren plain. There, stripped of food, water, and comfort, he would sit alone for days, sometimes up to 4, sometimes longer. No fire, no shelter, just the wilderness, his thoughts, and the endless night sky. The goal wasn't survival, though that in itself was uncertain. The goal was revelation. Native belief held that spirits would visit those who suffered for truth, offering guidance through dreams or hallucinations. A guardian spirit, perhaps an animal, perhaps something stranger, might appear and claim the young man as its own. Imagine it, your body screaming with hunger, your lips cracked from thirst, your mind drifting between sleep and waking delirium. And then, visions. Some saw glowing animals, others heard voices. Some reported leaving their bodies entirely, floating above the land. But this wasn't just a psychedelic escape. When the boy returned, he was expected to recount his vision in detail. The tribe's elders would interpret its meaning, whether he had been chosen for war, healing, or spiritual leadership. If no vision came, he might be sent back to try again. Failure was humiliation. Success meant identity. The vision quest reveals something profound about Native spirituality. Pain and deprivation weren't obstacles. They were the gateway. The boy didn't earn his adulthood through comfort, but through endurance, hunger, and solitude. While the vision quest stripped away food and water, another ritual aimed to strip away impurity itself: the sweat lodge. Picture this: a low dome-shaped hut built from willow branches, its frame covered tightly with hides or blankets. Inside, a central pit was dug, into which glowing red stones heated in a roaring fire outside were placed. Participants, often naked, crawled inside and sat shoulder to shoulder in the sweltering dark. Then, water was poured over the stones. The chamber filled instantly with steam, thick and choking. The air burned the lungs. Sweat poured from every pore. And the ceremony began. Songs were chanted. Drums thundered. Elders prayed aloud to the spirits. For hours, the participants sat in this living oven, enduring unbearable heat. Some fainted. Some vomited. Some swore they saw visions as the line between physical torment and spiritual transcendence blurred. Why do this? For Native peoples, the sweat lodge was both purification and rebirth. Emerging from the suffocating darkness, drenched in sweat, was like being born anew. But purification wasn't just symbolic. In a world without modern medicine, cleansing rituals were seen as essential to health. Yet the sweat lodge wasn't optional self-care. It was duty. A warrior might sweat before battle, a shaman before healing. Communities sweated together before major hunts or spiritual decisions. And make no mistake, the heat could kill. European observers sometimes mocked the practice as barbaric. But for the tribes, the suffering was the point. To endure fire without burning was to prove yourself worthy of the spirit's favor. If the vision quest tested the mind and the sweat lodge tested the body, the sun dance tested the very limits of human endurance. This was, without question, one of the most brutal rituals in all of Native America. Held during midsummer, the sun dance was a massive tribal gathering. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, participated, but a few, usually young warriors, offered themselves as living sacrifices to the Great Spirit. Here's how it worked. In front of the entire tribe, the dancer's chest was pierced with sharpened wooden skewers, driven through the flesh just beneath the skin. Leather thongs were tied to the skewers and attached to the central sun dance pole, the sacred axis of the world. Then, the dance began. For hours, even days, the men would lean back, straining against the thongs, their skin tearing slowly with each pull. They danced in agony, eyes fixed on the blazing sun, praying for visions or blessings for their people. Some fainted. Some tore free, their flesh ripping open as they collapsed in exhaustion. Others endured until the thongs finally snapped loose. Blood ran freely. Pain was unbearable, but the suffering was the offering. Why such cruelty? Because the sun dance wasn't about the individual, it was about the tribe. By sacrificing his own body, the dancer offered his pain for the survival of his people. In his wounds, they saw hope. European settlers who witnessed the sun dance were horrified. They called it savage, barbaric, inhuman. Yet for the tribes, it was the highest expression of devotion, bravery, and connection to the divine. You might be asking yourself, why all this pain? Why starve, burn, pierce, and bleed in the name of spirituality? The answer lies in a worldview fundamentally different from our own. To native tribes, suffering wasn't punishment. It was purification. Pain was proof of sincerity. Endurance was proof of strength. And when you consider that survival itself in the ancient world required pain-cold winters, long hunts, starvation, or these rituals weren't separate from life. They were life distilled into ceremony. For native peoples, death wasn't simply the end of a life, it was the opening of a door. Every tribe had its own vision of what lay beyond. Some spoke of shadowy lands across rivers, others of endless hunting grounds under an eternal sky. But what united them all was the belief that death demanded ritual, and the more bizarre the ritual, the more powerful the passage into the spirit world. While Europeans buried their dead beneath crosses, native rituals embraced sky, fire, and sometimes even the flesh of the departed themselves. What you're about to hear may sound dark, disturbing, but to the people who practiced these rites, they were acts of love, honor, and survival. Among the Sioux, Cheyenne, and many other Plains tribes, the dead were not lowered into the earth. Instead, they were lifted up literally. The body of the deceased was wrapped tightly in hides, painted with sacred symbols, and placed on a raised platform or scaffold, high above the ground. Sometimes, the body was lashed between the branches of tall trees, swaying with the wind. Why? Because the people believed that death was a journey upward. By exposing the body to the sky, the spirit could ascend freely. Birds, particularly vultures and eagles, often descended to consume the flesh. To us, this may sound gruesome. To them, it was beautiful. The birds were not desecrators, but messengers, carrying the soul to the heavens piece by piece. Family members visited the scaffold for months afterward, bringing offerings, singing songs, and speaking to the spirit. The dead were never abandoned. They lingered, woven into the living world, until the elements had finished their work. European settlers recoiled at this practice, calling it savage. But think for a moment. Is it any stranger than burying a body to rot beneath the soil? To the Sioux, being lifted toward the sun was the ultimate honor. Other tribes turned not to sky, but to fire. Among the Apache and certain Pueblo peoples, cremation was the chosen path. When a person died, their possessions were gathered and burned along with the body. This wasn't destruction, it was transfer. The belief was that everything burned, would accompany the soul into the afterlife. Imagine this scene: flames roaring in the desert night, sparks swirling into the black sky, the smell of burning wood mixed with flesh. Family members circled the pyre, chanting prayers, urging the spirit to rise with the smoke. But there was more. Sometimes, the home of the deceased was burned as well, reducing it to ashes. Why? Because death was seen as contagious. To linger in the house of the dead was to risk spiritual corruption. By burning it all, the body, the belongings, the home, the tribe cleansed itself, ensuring the spirit moved on and the living were safe. This wasn't destruction for its own sake. It was renewal. The flames consumed the past, making room for the future. Death didn't always end with burial. For the Iroquois Confederacy, death demanded balance. When a member of the community was killed, the grief of the family could not be ignored. To restore balance, the tribe sometimes waged what they called mourning wars. Raiding parties were sent against neighboring tribes. But the goal wasn't always revenge. Prisoners were taken alive, not just to be punished, but to be adopted. A captured enemy might be brought into the grieving family, replacing the lost loved one. He or she would be stripped of their old identity, sometimes brutally tortured, and then ritually welcomed as kin. But adoption wasn't always the end. In some cases, captives were executed in ceremonies of shocking violence, burned, beaten, even flayed alive. The suffering was seen as a sacrifice, both avenging the dead and feeding the spirits with agony. For the Iroquois, life and death were threads in the same web. The death of one demanded the transformation or destruction of another. One of the most disturbing claims made by European colonists was that some native tribes practiced ritual cannibalism. The truth is complex. Yes, there is evidence, particularly among tribes in the Great Lakes and certain war parties of the Iroquois, that parts of enemies were consumed after battle. But this wasn't done out of hunger. It was symbolic. Eating a piece of the fallen warrior was believed to transfer his strength, his courage, even his spirit into the victor. This wasn't unique to Native America. Cultures around the world, from the Aztecs to the Celts, embraced similar beliefs. What made it unique here was the connection to warfare. Flesh wasn't just meat. It was power. Yet it's important to note, cannibalism was not widespread. For most tribes, the very idea was abhorrent. Many of the wildest claims by Europeans were exaggerations or outright propaganda, used to justify conquest by painting native peoples as savages. But in some cases, the truth lingers. Bits of ritual flesh-eating did occur. And for those who practiced it, it was never about the body. It was about absorbing the soul. One of the most haunting rituals connected to death wasn't about the dead at all, but the dying. Among warriors, particularly in Plains tribes, it was common to sing a death song when facing execution or certain doom in battle. Imagine it, captured by enemies, tied to a stake, knowing torture is coming. Instead of begging for mercy, a warrior would lift his voice in song, his death song. The words varied, but the message was the same. I am not afraid. My spirit is strong. Death will not defeat me. These songs weren't whispers. They were defiance. To sing while dying was to rob the enemy of victory. Pain might claim the body, but not the soul. Witnesses, both native and European, spoke of the eerie power of these songs. Warriors burning alive, still chanting defiantly as smoke filled their lungs. The sound of voices rising against the silence of death. For the living, these songs became eternal. Families remembered them. Tribes repeated them. The dying warrior, in his final act, gave his people courage. You might be asking again, why so much focus on pain, fire, even flesh? Because death, for Native peoples, wasn't just personal. It was communal. Every loss tore a hole in the tribe, and that hole demanded mending. Through scaffold burials, fire, mourning wars, or even ritual cannibalism. The community re-wove itself, binding wounds with ritual. And for them, there was no clear line between body and spirit. To hurt the flesh was to shape the soul. To burn the body was to free it. To consume the enemy was to own him forever. Death wasn't the end for Native American tribes. It was a passage, a transformation, sometimes a battlefield of the spirit. Their rituals, however bizarre they may seem to us, were built on one truth. The soul could not move on without ceremony. But here's what I want you to think about as we move into Part 3. What does it mean when pain and death themselves become tools for life? Because in the next part, we're going beyond life and death to rituals of rebirth, transformation, and bizarre ceremonies that blurred the line between human and divine. We've journeyed through the rituals of survival, of death, of the strange and the painful. But there's another dimension to Native American traditions, one that is even harder to comprehend. Transformation. For many tribes, humans were not fixed beings. They could change. They could merge with animals, take on new souls, and step across the blurred line between man and God. This belief shaped rituals that were so bizarre, so shocking, that European settlers often mistook them for witchcraft. But to the people who practiced them, these ceremonies were about power. Power to heal, to hunt, to fight, to survive in a world where spirits walked as close as shadows. One of the most widespread and dramatic rituals was the vision quest. Among Plains tribes like the Lakota, a young man seeking his adult identity would undergo days of fasting, isolation, and physical torment. He would climb to a lonely hilltop, strip down, and sit without food or water. Sometimes he would cut strips of flesh from his own body as an offering to the spirits. The purpose? To break the body so the spirit could see. Exhaustion, dehydration, and pain triggered hallucinations visions. These visions were interpreted as messages from the spirit world. A great bird might reveal itself as the young man's guardian. A storm might symbolize his warrior destiny. A strange figure might whisper his sacred name. The quest was brutal, but it was also empowering. A boy came back a man, carrying a vision that gave him authority within the tribe. Without it, he had no spiritual anchor. With it, he had a destiny. Settlers called it madness. But for native youth, it was the doorway to adulthood. If the vision quest was individual, the sun dance was communal and far more terrifying. Every summer, tribes across the plains gathered for this ritual. At its heart stood a sacred cottonwood tree, its branches stripped bare, a symbol of the universe itself. Warriors, painted in sacred colors, approached the tree with hooks carved from bone or wood. These hooks were pierced through the flesh of their chests, sometimes their backs. Rawhide ropes tied the hooks to the central pole. And then the dance began. For hours, sometimes days, the dancers pulled against the ropes, tearing their own flesh, circling the tree, collapsing, rising again, all to the beat of drums and the chants of elders. Blood poured down their chests, flesh ripped. Some fainted from exhaustion, but they continued, because the sun dance wasn't about endurance. It was about sacrifice. The belief was simple. The more flesh you gave, the more prayers you carried to the Creator. Warriors offered their bodies for the health of their families, the survival of their tribes, the success of the buffalo hunts. For outsiders, the sun dance looked like torture. For the dancers, it was love. Love expressed not with words, but with blood. Another bizarre ritual belief that humans could become animals. In Navajo traditions, the terrifying figure of the skinwalker emerged as medicine men who corrupted their powers by wearing the skins of animals and becoming them. These beings were feared, accused of flying, running like wolves, or appearing as coyotes with human eyes. But not all transformation was dark. Among the Hopi and Zuni, ritual dancers donned masks and skins of sacred animals to channel their powers. A man dressed as a deer didn't just look like a deer. He was the deer, at least in spirit, calling the animals closer to hunters. Some tribes even believed warriors could take on the speed or strength of the animals they embodied. Before battle, rituals involving paint, masks, and chants transformed men into beasts, merging human and animal in ways that blurred identity itself. To become an animal was to escape human limits, to walk between worlds. Transformation didn't always come from fasting or pain. Sometimes it came from plants. The peyote cactus, a small, spineless button-shaped plant, contained powerful hallucinogens. For tribes like the Comanche, Kiowa, and later the Native American Church, peyote became the doorway to the gods. Ceremonies were held in tipis, with fires burning all night. Men and women consumed the bitter cactus, and soon visions flooded in kaleidoscopic images, voices of ancestors, flashes of animals, even journeys through the stars. The peyote ritual wasn't just about seeing strange shapes. It was about healing. The visions revealed cures for illness, guidance for troubled families, wisdom for tribal leaders. But the price was high. Peyote could induce vomiting, convulsions, and terrifying visions. Some participants screamed for hours, claiming spirits tore at their flesh. Others emerged radiant, saying they had spoken with gods. European missionaries condemned peyote as devil worship, but for the people, it was communion, a way to speak directly with the powers that shaped the universe. Perhaps the most bizarre and brutal initiation ritual of all belonged to the Mandan people of the upper Missouri River, the Okipa ceremony. Young men seeking to prove themselves worthy underwent an ordeal that defies belief. First, they fasted for 4 days without food or water. Then, their bodies were pierced with wooden skewers driven through the muscles of their chests, arms, and backs. Ropes were attached, and the young men were hoisted into the air, dangling by their flesh. As they swung, they were expected to sing their death songs, smiling through the agony. The ceremony didn't end there. Sometimes, skulls of buffalo were tied to the young men's ankles, dragging them down, tearing flesh even further. The ordeal lasted until they fainted, or until the elders declared the spirits had accepted their sacrifice. To survive Okipa was to be reborn. You were no longer a boy, no longer merely human. You had touched the spirit world through pain. It horrified outsiders. But to the Mandan, it created warriors who feared nothing, not even death itself. All of these rituals, visions, dances, shape-shifting, plant medicine, torture shared a single purpose: to step beyond ordinary life. For Native peoples, reality wasn't flat. It was layered. Spirits hovered just beyond sight. Dreams and visions weren't illusions, but messages. Pain wasn't cruelty, but the knife that cut open the spirit. European settlers, with their rigid Christian worldview, saw savagery. But to the tribes, these rituals were bridges. Bridges between human and divine, between body and soul, between the living and the spirit world. So now, we've crossed through all three realms: survival, death, and transformation. From the piercing hooks of the sun dance, to the flesh-ripping Okipa, to the visions sparked by fasting and peyote, these bizarre rituals reveal something profound. For Native Americans, the body was never just flesh. It was a tool, a vessel, a key to survival, a key to honor, a key to transcendence. So the next time you hear someone dismiss these traditions as savage, remember this: behind every drop of blood, every painful scream, and every haunting vision was a belief in something greater.